In December, Board Game Arena gave us a Christmas present, which was a feature that's been widely requested for a long time since I've been a member of the site, and that is the ability to set up a tournament for games with more than 2 players. Tournaments are the reason that I have a paid-for member account on the site. I have run tournaments for different games in the past, and I've played in plenty of tournaments. And one of the things I did immediately was start setting up some tournaments for Carcassonne, which, how do I explain this? Carcassonne is not my favourite game, but some of what makes a game good or bad to play is not a function of the game itself. Carcassonne has a huge playing community. It is one of the very few multiplayer games that are designed to have 3 or more players. You know, you can play Carcassonne 2-player, but it strips a lot of what makes it Carcassonne out of the game. It's one of the few multiplayer games that has a large competitive community so that you can actually play competitive tournaments with more than 3 players. So I was dead keen to set up some tournaments, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of the games from the very first tournament I set up, and I'm going to commentate you through the game. Because this is the first one of these I'm doing, a lot of this is going to be introducing terminology. If you prefer to get this kind of thing in written form, I did a strategy review for Carcassonne many years ago on Board Game Geek, and I will put a link up to that. But I'll be introducing some of the terminology as I go along. So we're in the replay here. In the first tournament, which I ran in January, this was the highest ranked game in terms of the final positions of the 4 players who took part. Takuta eventually won the tournament. We'll see whether or not they win this game. And the other players all finished very high up. So green has the first move, and what we get immediately is a freebie. The freebie is the most basic tactical move in Carcassonne. It's enormously important to understand how it works. In the basic game, you play 17 tiles, but you only have 7 meeples. You need the meeples to score. You have 18 scoring opportunities for them. You can only use 7 of those unless you get a meeple back. A freebie is a move where you play the meeple and it is immediately returned to your hand. It happens when you place, most frequently when you place a 2-tile city, as green just did, or when you place a road junction attached to another road junction. Here it's important to understand the version of the rules you're playing. The rules of Carcassonne vary enormously between different rules. So in the original rules, that move would have won 2 points for green. In the modern rules, that wins 4 points for green. There are similar changes to how fields work and things like that. I'll just put up for you the particular version of the rules that's being used here. Okay, so let's carry on. So in general, as people work along, what they're looking for is to put their meeple onto a city first. Cities tend to score the most points. They're the best thing. There are 4 options, of course, and roads second. However, you will ultimately want to have meeples on both roads and cities. You need the maximum opportunity. So whatever meeples you have on the board, ideally you want a situation where each of those meeples will benefit from different tiles being drawn. That way, you've got lots of different ways you can place tiles, so it doesn't matter which tile turns up in your hand. Okay, so this is not where I would have placed this road tile. that blue has just placed. I would have placed the road tile up here immediately above the red meeple. I'm just going to say something about the replay function on Board Game Arena. You pick a player whose perspective you see things from, and these grey locations show where you can place a tile that player is currently holding. So they're not actually a good guide to where these tiles can go. So I would have placed this tile here, and I would have put a meeple on it, and I would have faced it this way. And my idea is fairly simple. I want to share points with red. So this is what's going on here and here. You can score for tiles other people place if you arrange your tiles so that either the opponent has to finish off what you're doing in order to complete their own things, or you get to connect the feature that you're in to the feature your opponent's in. And that is known as a share. Shares are the best way to score points, and probably the most important strategy tactical element you need to get used to. Both how you do it, how you avoid it, right? And we'll come to how you turn them into steals later. Okay, so I said that a share is good, and yellow has just done the opposite. Yellow has just done a cutout, and this has placed a tile to prevent blue from joining up with yellow's field. Why do that? Well, if you share with two other players, then you only gain an advantage over one opponent in a 4-player game. If you share with one other opponent, then you gain an advantage over two. So you ideally don't want to share with 3 people. 3 people distributes the points too widely. It minimises the advantage. And in this particular situation, green looks like they have more potential points than blue, so they're contributing more to yellow's share than blue is. So this is a very sensible placement for yellow to make. Yellow doesn't have anybody on a road at the moment, so if I'm honest, I would have put a yellow meeple onto that tile on the road. Blue is presumably going to add a tile to the end of it, so it might connect through to the red road. It's a potentially valuable road, so I would absolutely have put a meeple on there. Again, another freebie. Because 2-tile cities are worth 4 points in the modern rules, you should basically always take freebies like that anytime you can get them. It's very, very rare that it would be worth doing something else with the tile. You'll notice it's given green 8 points in hand versus nothing for the other players. The game keeps a track of points in hand up here next to the star. It's worth noting that's not the actual number of points players currently have, because incomplete features are still worth points at the end of the game. So blue has 2 road sections and a city section, so at the end of the game blue would have 3. Green currently has 1 city, that'd be worth 1. Yellow has 2 cities, that would be worth 2. Red has a city and a road, that would be worth 2. However, that still puts green a good 6 points out in the lead in this current game. Is this a good fielder? So there are 4 different ways you can place a meeple in the basic version of the game. One of them is an automatic. That is, if a cloister turns up, you always put a meeple on it. In fact, cloisters turning up is the reason you don't want to run out of meeples, because they're never worth less than 3 or 4 points. They're usually worth 7 to 9. Cities are usually your next strongest pick because you make the most points from cities in general. Roads are good for small freebies. It's generally good to have a meeple on at least 1 road. So on balance, you should always be putting something on a road. Fielders are the most difficult choice to make. At the end of the game, a field in this version of the rules will make 3 points for every completed adjacent city. That's the value of the field. So a field will be worth quite a lot. In this case, this field is going to be worth 3 points at the end of the game, as it currently stands. But the meeple is tied down till the end of the game. And remember I said that Carcassonne is fundamentally a meeple management game. So if you tie down your pieces on fields, you won't have them to make other scoring opportunities. And I've genuinely seen games where somebody has at the end pulled in a 20 to 30 point field, but they've still lost because over the course of the game, the fielders that they had committed weren't available to score other points, and they lost more than 20 or 30 points during the game for that. This is very early in the game, and that's a long commitment of a fielder. And take a look where the roads are beginning to pan out. It's very likely the roads are going to form a U shape around that position and limit that field to just those two cities. The other players are going to have no incentive to build cities over on that side of the board. So that field is probably only going to be worth 6 points at the end of the game. So on balance, I'm not sure that that was a good placement. There are better places for this road. In general, if you've got a variety of choices and there's no immediate advantage, try to place somewhere where other people have an incentive to add things to this. So there will have to be a three-way junction placed here at some point in the game. There's just no choice about that. If you place the road here, then somebody else will place this tile for you. If you place the road here, then potentially somebody will play this tile and somebody will play this tile. This one tends to work best if you're early in the game and there are different opponents wanting to place in both locations. So there are other places this could have been placed that I think would have been more effective. So, stealing. Stealing is an important concept. So I talked about sharing. The other thing you can do is you can use your plays to get more meeples than your opponents into a feature. And if you do this, they don't get points, and you do. This is a steal. There are good reasons to steal. If you play the two-player variant of Carcassonne, you will realise that stealing is everything you do. There is no sharing in a two-player because there's only you and your opponent. So there's no third party that you and the other player can gain points against. And online play has been dominated by two players, to the extent that if you go onto Board Game Geek, you will often see that people recommend Carcassonne primarily as a two-player game. This is not a sign that it is actually a good two-player game. This is purely a sign that the vast majority of players are deeply inexperienced at the game, and their only experience of playing is two-player, so they tend to think of it as a two-player game, even though it's actually significantly inferior in that mode. And the result of that is that players are sometimes, even quite good players, are sometimes very aggressive and will attempt steals when they're not in their own interest. This one is not in green's interest, because what it does is it disincentivises yellow to commit to joining the two up. If yellow gets the opportunity, they will now refuse to join the two up, or worse, they could place a tile here and add another meeple of their own, in which case green might be tempted to place a tile here and add a meeple of their own. That's known as a food fight. Food fights are bad for everybody involved because what they do is they suck in meeples, which both of you could be using elsewhere. These meeples don't score any extra points, and the other players are still busy scoring around you. Now, there are absolutely times when you should play, when you should steal, right? Because the advantage is great. But this is clearly not one of them. And green will come very close to being punished for this particular play later in the game. So I don't quite understand blue's placement of the cloister here. So if you get a cloister, you place it and you put a meeple on it. There are no exceptions. This one is worth 5 points immediately. It's not a bad position. Yellow will be inclined to place another tile there, so for no work it'll be worth 6. However, if it was placed here, it would only be worth 4 points rather than the 5, but it would have added a road section and capped off one end of this road. So that would have been worth the additional point there. Making your tiles do double work is something that you should be thinking about all the time. So what we've got here is yellow has now separated these two potential cities. Perfectly sensible play. Doesn't want to get involved in a food fight with green. Green's got 2 meatballs down, scoring for 1 city. So this is good play from yellow, and it shows why green shouldn't have played that tile in the first place. Yellow might have been disinclined to do this if they were going to share. Okay, I've looked at this several times, and this is the first of a series of unforced errors by the blue player. This tile that has gone on yellow city and scored yellow points could have gone on the left of the cloister over here and added 1 point to blue, and have had a blue marker on there, so another point for that. So I don't understand why the decision was made. Maybe blue just missed that they could place it there. There's actually quite a limited number of places that tile can be put. This is an important play by green, and it's a good play. This will have a big effect on the final game. Green could have just added to the city, but the city's not very valuable to green. Yes, potentially it would share with the red city up here, but green already has several possible city placement opportunities, which will take most of the potential city tiles, and it's important to actually finish this city down here because there's 2 meeples tied up in it. It's a weak city for green. Now, on the other hand, the field is potentially very powerful. There's only 3 points in it at the moment, but the odds are this will be a city. This will almost certainly finish, and it's very likely this will finish. And there are people playing around here. So this is potentially going to be worth 12 to 15 points at the end of the game, and green is in there now and ready to take advantage of that. So we get some fairly standard play here. And now we begin to see the strength of green's fielder. So you can see cities are beginning to complete around it. This is a good potential share here. It's something that weaker players often overlook are roads. So the difference between a road and a city is fairly simple. A city scores 1 point per tile, but if the city is completed, it scores 2 points per tile. A road only ever scores 1 point per tile. So roads seem like they're less valuable, but you're going to draw road pieces. There's no way around that. So thinking about how to maximise the points you get from roads, and sharing is usually the best way to do that, because potentially you might have a 3 or 4 section road and the other person might have a 3 or 4 section road. In this case, yellow has 2 and red has 2. One of them places the joining piece, then they'll have placed 3 tiles and scored 5 points. That's not a bad score at all. So never overlook roads. Beginning players tend to score very little from roads. More experienced players score considerably more from them, and it's often the difference between the experienced player's score and the less experienced one. There would have been an alternative use for the two road straights we've just seen. And I wanted to discuss that. It's a hard call to make. I'm not going to criticise yellow or red for making it. But if a straight was placed here and a fielder was placed on the right-hand side, green is going to have to connect here. And the only pieces that do that in the basic set are corners with city corners there, so they allow a clear fielding route through. And then a junction here would allow a clear fielding route. So a fielder here might potentially get into what is now clearly a fairly valuable field later in the game. Like I say, it's a hard call to make. It would have tied up a meeple on a bit of a chance, but it might have been worth yellow and red considering. I just want to discuss something that occasionally players don't consider, which is scoring another player a considerable chunk of points for some benefit of your own. So red just placed this cap here, where it helped complete their own city. It's effectively worth 1 point on its own if it makes the difference between completing that city and not completing that city. Then it could be worth as much as 11 points. So it's a pretty valuable play. But it could have been placed here and capped off the yellow city. Now, why would you do that? Well, yellow's going to complete that city whether you cap it off or not. So you're only actually saving yellow 1 tile placement. You're only giving them 2 points they wouldn't otherwise get. You're only depriving yourself 1 point if you're not going to complete that city. And you could put a fielder here. That fielder would be immediately worth 3 points for having this city in their field. But they would have genuine possibility that something could go in here and connect into this field. So it's worth a consideration. I'm not saying it's a good play, but as you begin to develop your thinking around Carcassonne, you should start thinking about those sorts of plays because they can make the difference. See what I mean about cloisters? That's immediately worth 7 points. I don't like this play. Remember, roads don't double at the end of the game, so this play is literally only worth 2 points. The odds of this city completing seem fairly slim. You could have placed it here, connecting the chapel to this road, then placed a meeple on the road instead of on the city. That would have been worth 4 points right now. So that's 2 points better because it would have given you a 3-point road and an extra tile around your chapel. It would have given an opponent an incentive to play here, another point on your chapel, and it would have meant that the odds are when a junction goes in here, played by another player, you would score the road and get it back. So overall, I would rate this worth about 5 or 6 points as opposed to a mere 2 points down here. I think it shows the general tendency Carcassonne players have. They tend to want to put things on cities rather than to use the other features. This is a great share by red. This is a really good share by red. I think actually on a previous turn, it was red I discussed whether or not red should have placed that piece there, capped this off and taken a fielder. But this is actually an even better move because potentially you're looking at 2 placements by red, corner piece here, and this. There's no immediate way for another player to get in. They're 2 tiles away from attempting a share of their own. And you're benefiting from 5 tiles of yellow's hard work. So this is a great play. Yellow returns with another equally good play. They've just moved their own 3-point road to being a 6-point road. In the process, of course, they've moved red's 2-point road to being a 6-point road. So just think about how that alters the relative scores overall. Yellow has lost a point relative to red, but they have gained 3 points relative to both blue and green. And a fielder. This sets up a nice share for green. Right? This is a good one to go into. Okay, let's look at this placement. This is a fielder for no points. So this meeple is tied up till the end of the game and it currently isn't scoring anything. What on earth is green playing at? Well, this field is really, really valuable. And this yellow meeple here is potentially threatening to come into it. It would require 2 placements here and here to connect over the top of this city. But it wouldn't require particularly unusual tiles to do so. Green's looking at that and thinking they do not want to share the points. Especially not with yellow, who is running at 14 points in hand and has 17 points on the table. So yellow's running at 31 points at the moment, as opposed to green's 8. If green makes some of these cities, that closes some of the gap up, but it's still, yellow is a major threat in a way that blue probably isn't. So sharing the points with yellow doesn't look very healthy. So green has committed to trying to block that. Single tile placement here will mean they're in the same thing. If it doesn't connect up, then green shares the points for this field. If it does connect up, then green has the majority, so steals the points for the whole field. Green now has only 1 meeple left. This is not a great position to be in. You can afford to drop to 1 meeple sometimes, especially if you're sitting on meeples that you know are going to come back, right? So diversity in your placement is really important if you drop down to this level. There's only 1 type of tile that's going to go in here. There's only 1 type of tile that's going to go in here. It's going to take at least 3 tiles before this meeple comes back. So green's got problems, right? This is a dangerous position to be in. I don't know what was going on. I presume blue was just having a really bad day. This is another unforced error. Blue doesn't place a meeple. There's no gain. This would have been worth 3 points below the cloister. This would have got the meeple back and been worth 4 points. This would have at least been something. This placement just doesn't make any sense. I've been congratulating yellow a lot so far on what are generally good plays. This, unfortunately, is not one of them. This is a tile counting error. There are only three tiles of the type that will go into this gap. This one, and this one. And they're all on the board. So there's no way for this to connect to here. So this play is worth 1 point and ties down a meeple. Not, unfortunately, a successful play. So green gets a little bit of luck, draws a junction, and is able to recover one of their onboard meeples. And they play one because it's 2 points immediately if they do so. I might have been tempted to play it on the opposite side, given how much green's current situation is basically resting on whether or not they draw the right tile. And green does draw the right tile. So this, I mean, ultimately, there is a degree of luck in Carcassonne. You can't get round that. There's luck in any game with random draws. Green has got the luck they need, and they are going to be able to score that city and potentially connect their two fielders together. So, yeah. And they've overcome their meeple shortage. This was actually quite a reasonable play by blue. Yes, scores green up immediately and gets green meeples back, but green has already got a meeple surplus, so that's not a big issue. But it scores the cloister point and it gets a freebie on the road. Freebies are worth taking right the way down to the end of the game. I'm not convinced by this fielder. It doesn't seem like a particularly strong play to me. It depends upon exactly the right tile turning up. I'm just looking to see if we have an example of the correct tile on the board. So this one. It's this tile here that's required in order to do that. I think that's the only one that's currently out, so there is a tile of that type available. I suppose if it turns up it's worth 9 points, but it's a bit of a gamble. I wouldn't have capped off the road here. Hive Mind hasn't got a particular shortage of meeples. I'd have been tempted to place here and take the freebie at this stage. Okay, this isn't a bad share. Right? A single tile placement will create a lot of additional points. Green has a lot of meeples now available. There's only 3 or 4 placements to go to the end of the game, so it makes a lot of sense to be trying to put fielders down in potentially useful places. It scores potentially if this city is completed. It also prevents an opponent from putting a fielder in the same place. So it's, as the game closes in on the end, if you're holding on in meeple surplus, then there's a lot of incentive to place as many fielders as possible. This would have been better placed on this city because it doesn't change what's needed to complete the city, and if the city completes, then the points for it are doubled. Realistically, the chances of drawing what you need to complete this city, which is 3 tiles, in... I'm not sure blue even has 3 tiles left to draw, are pretty slim. There's no real point to this fielder placement. I feel like at the end here, yellow makes 2 consecutive mistakes. And both of them seem to be a function of not really taking into account the tile count. Those would be good moves played in the mid-game when there's potentially a lot of moves still available. Any tile going in here would connect yellow into this field. You'd have potentials for creating majorities. That's great. But at this stage, that just isn't going to happen. Had it been placed here, then there's a good chance of getting something that would have linked together there. But in all honesty, it would have been better off literally just being placed and having a meeple on it, right? Or just being used to extend this road here. Remember, this wipes yellow's meeples out. They're going to get at least 2 more tile placements, and they're not going to be able to place anything on them because they're not going to have the meeples available. This is a fine play. This immediately connects green into here. It prevents anything funny happening up here. It's 3 additional points if these 2 fields don't connect together for green. There is actually a stronger play, and again, it's down to that. Should you do things to benefit other players? Let's be absolutely clear about this. Blue is not in contention any longer. Hasn't been for some time. So there's no harm in giving blue points at this stage. Place the tile here, cap off blue's cities, and then put a meeple on this side. Because of the way the rules work in this version, each field scores separately. This is a field, and this is a field, and they now both have an extra city in them. So that placement would be worth 6 points, rather than the 3 this one's worth. So this is not a bad play. It's perfectly respectable play. It's just that there was a stronger play available over here if you were willing to score points for a player who's basically out of contention. It also, yellow is potentially in contention, and giving them a meeple back at this point when they're stymied by their lack of meeples, that seems like, just not full awareness of the situation other players are in. That's the absolutely right. Given the modern fielding rules, because remember these 2 count as different fields, so they both score for this city. This is a perfectly sensible, respectable play for blue. It's immediately worth 8 points, and potentially somebody will complete a city here, putting out another 3. So, yeah, great play for blue. Won't be enough to make up some of the unforced errors from earlier in the game. Now, I want to draw attention to how the points are looking at the moment. So, you can see down the side here, green's on 41, which is a very substantial lead over everybody else. However, while green has 41 points in hand, excluding fielders, they have almost nothing on the board. These 3 points for this city are it. The other players are all holding substantial on-board points. So yellow has 8 in this road, 7 in this road, 8 in this city. So that's enough to bring yellow about 4 or 5 points ahead of green, just from those onboard points. So green's position looks good, but ultimately it's going to come down to the fielders. And it's going to be closer than it initially appears. Oh, it's just horrible when you get this. You get the 4-way city piece, and there's just nowhere you can put it that doesn't go on an opponent's city. It's just, it doesn't really matter, but it's just so annoying when it does happen. Okay, so we're down to scoring incomplete features, and you can see the points for the other players gradually racking up. so they catch the distance between them and green. So they were around 20. They're now about level with green. There's still points to come in. Those cloisters for red and yellow are going to make a big difference. Can you see how this is going to end up? There, so red and yellow have just passed green's points total, and they still have cloisters to come in. They're going to have passed it by quite a margin. So it is going to come down to those fields. Is that fielding advantage that green is holding enough to make the difference in the final analysis? And you can see that the computer scores off the fields one at a time. If you're doing this in person, by the way, a really good thing to do over the board is when you start scoring incomplete features, do it with the player who has the fewest points at the moment. And then when you move to fielders, again, start with the player with the fewest points. It kind of increases the tension because it causes people to rack past each other on each scoring cycle. And the final score, 74 points for green. Yes, this fielder here, which was ultimately worth 12 points, and this fielder here, which was worth 9, they turned out to be critical. Yes, these two fielders were also valuable, 6 and 3. They show the advantage of coming into the end of the game with plenty of meeples in hand, because otherwise you couldn't have spent those on the fields. So green played a great game, and the critical move of the game was getting that field in there. Everybody involved made some errors. There were places where both red and yellow could have improved their score, especially yellow. Yellow made 2 errors very close in to the end of the game. Were they enough to make up a 12-point deficit? I'm not sure that they were, but they were certainly substantial. You can see the effect of blue's unforced errors. Blue is a good 15 points off the pace of any of the other players. So anyway, there we go. That was the highest ranked match in the January standard tournament. I hope you enjoyed the walkthrough of it. I hope you got something from looking at these strong players actually making their moves. And I might do another one of these when the next tournament completes. Thank you.